Today I'm excited to bring you Vis Naidoo from SAIT, a true seasoned professional with a unique blend. He's responsible for bringing in Sesame Street to South Africa, who's also worked with a great world leader we all know, President Nelson Mandela. His experience spans across multiple industries, and he's built a reputation for his unique ability to bring multiple technologies to shaping the future of technology. Let's get into the next wave. This is the Infinite Waves podcast, where innovation meets imagination. From trailblazing technologies to inspiring stories of leadership, we're charting a course towards the future filled with limitless possibilities. Together with Creative Innovations Lab, let's explore AI and future technology. All right, so up next we have a seasoned professional in the education industry, and this gentleman is also responsible for bringing in Sesame Street, yes, Sesame Street, into South Africa. So let me welcome Vis Naidoo from SAIT to the Infinite Waves podcast. Vis, it's nice to have you with me on the podcast.
Yeah, it's a pleasure, Russell. Nice to be here.
Absolutely. So let me get to a very interesting question. Before I get to the Sesame Street part of the conversation, I'd like to understand what was your background? What was that story that shaped Vis Naidoo to be the gentleman who's sitting in front of me today?
Could be a long story, Russell.
We have all the time, so please, love to hear that.
So it's interesting. So I'm born in South Africa, I think about third or fourth generation from India, and came through as forefathers came through as indentured laborers essentially, and never went back, or many never went back. But in the South Africa context, I grew up living in what is described, or what is called, an Indian-only area, and so really shielded from interacting in a meaningful way with any other race in South Africa, and that was during the apartheid times. And what really helped was going to university, and in that process being exposed to community work and seeing firsthand what poverty looked like. Middle class family, dad was a teacher, mom worked in a factory as a clerk. And so never really got exposed to it, and it was good growing up in that way, but really with blinders. Got to university and then started to do this work and discovered that there's another whole part of South Africa, and that changed me completely. I was going to do science and do microbiology, and eventually that was my degree, my first degree in sciences. But got to view this, got to interact with folks, and started to ask questions around, so why are people poor in this country? What's driving this? And started to understand the political context, the social context, and the economic context in the country. And this was in the early 1980s, and having finished school. So that shifted completely, and it shifted me away from science into looking at education and adult education, and especially working with community organizations, civic groups, trade union groups, women groups, and looking at training so that these organizations can be run better, and they can also challenge the apartheid government and the status quo. So that's the one pivotal moment in my life that kind of shifted me from a science track into a more, I don't know what you call it, but into an education track, and brought me to where I am now.
Wow. So you saw education as a solution to a problem that you experienced and saw firsthand in your country. And that's a very beautiful inspiration to do what you do. And I actually spoke to a colleague of yours and got to know that you had firsthand experience with one of the greatest world leaders in history of mankind, President Nelson Mandela. I'd really love to ask you, what was that experience like?
Sure. So I was fortunate enough to be in his presence on 3 different occasions. large meetings, so it's not like a one-on-one situation. Uh, but in those meetings, and like I say, two of them were very large. You felt a presence, no matter if you were sitting with a couple of hundred folks or not, or 20, 30 people as one meeting was. It was a presence. Some people walk into a room and you feel it, right?
Wow.
And it's that kind of personality, humble as anything, right? But very strict, So as we were growing up and as we were taking part in the processes of change, he was very strict to make sure that we did what we said we were going to do. And this was the time when I worked in the Ministry of Education in South Africa. And a lot of that was driven by what we had to do and the changes we had to make. And so, you felt a presence, but you also know that there's a strong accountability to what you're doing, because we had a really strong and, in my view, a wonderful vision of trying to change a country.
Wow, that's wonderful. And I know in the education sector, mentorship is part of education, because the professor-student or like the teacher-student relationship is all about mentorship and how you resonate that to inspire somebody to do beyond what you were taught. In your journey, who was that mentor for you? Did it have something to do with President Mandela, or did you have your own set of mentors that helped you become a great leader? Because why I mentioned this was, in my previous episode, the gentleman I spoke with said, great leaders help create great leaders. And I can see direct reference in your story over there as well. What's your experience with the mentors?
So I think from a mentorship perspective, political leaders in South Africa who were resistant fighters were all people we looked up to, because of what they stood for, what they articulated, and what they were prepared to do for that change. I think from a mentorship perspective, there was perhaps folks who were people that we were much more involved with that became mentors. So, for example, there was a strong mentor who I worked with at a university, and he was the head of our department. So we would spend a lot of time together, but just his ways of doing things, not so much saying this is how you should do it, but just showing how it should be done, was very instrumental in helping form my own habits. But then I had a range of mentors outside who I was involved with in various community and political processes in the country. And they were wonderful folks, absolutely intelligent, amazing humbleness, and really just the ability to make sure that they get things done, but also make sure that we are intellectually aware of what is happening. So they made sure that we understood and read a variety of different books. We understood and knew what was going on in the world and how that impacted South Africa. We had to understand the folks that we were working with in different communities and what it meant to be leading communities, but also being led by communities. And so all of that is what shaped, certainly, I believe, where I am right now.
Amazing. And I know that your journey comes through diverse path of industries. I mean, we are spanning from quantum material, which I will get back to that in a bit. But I'd like to understand, you have experience in multiple industries, education, business, you name it. What were some of the common challenges that you experience across industries that maybe technology can solve today?
Well, the one common feature in all of the different sectors that I worked in is people. And so the people side, no matter what technology you're using, no matter what you're doing, the people side is a critical part of it. And we're often we're often focused on how do you lead organizations. And the key lesson that came through many years ago was there are times when you lead an organization, and there are times when you'd follow what the organization wants to do and the people within that organization. And that, for me, kind of illustrated a different type of leadership model that is not about only being at the forefront, but it is also about understanding the people that are with you, and how do you take all of them into account in the context of what you're trying to achieve with that organization. So I think from that perspective, there's a variety of lessons from the organizations that I work for, the companies that I work for, but the people side is key. Now, there's all the talk of technology, artificial intelligence replacing people. My approach to this is that it'll never change and never replace people. It may require people to have a different set of skills and a different set of values, but it'll never replace people. And so still the key lesson out of all of that for me is being able to understand people, being able to work with people, being able to support people, and being able to make sure there's a strong accountability component. That for me is the key.
No, I couldn't agree more, because that is one challenge that we also face. Like we as a technology company, one of the challenges that we face is getting people to adopt, like you said, with the right skills when technology changes, or with the right attitude and the shift when something changes, so that they could easily succeed and adapt and successfully enjoy their careers and life the way it was. So I completely agree. Coming back to Sesame Street, what is that story, Vis?
Yeah.
How come you and Sesame Street cross paths in your journey? Can you share that story?
No, absolutely. So I in my role in South Africa in the Ministry of Education, I was responsible for looking at the area of educational technology, open and distant learning, and trying to build that component of the education system. And I was fortunate enough to having done some work with the public broadcaster in South Africa and helped to reshape the educational radio and educational television. And the head of the public broadcaster is a wonderful woman, or she was the head. And we were looking to figure out, how can we help that early childhood part of South Africa, of the education system. And in conversations with another friend who was with USAID at that point, we looked at, why would we not bring some of the best in the world? And Sesame Street was considered one of the best in the world. Or is still considered the best in the world for that learning at that age level. So we sat down, we worked a few things out, and we eventually got funding. We connected with Sesame Street. They were all happy to come through and support South Africa. It took a lot of negotiations because, Sesame Street is an educational television model, but it's also a business model. And a lot of negotiations, a lot of figuring out how do we make sure that Sesame Street in South Africa remains sustainable, that it can fund itself. It doesn't have to rely upon funding going forward. And the name Takalani Sesame was coined as the South African version of Sesame Street, which is Happiness Sesame Street. Right? And what we did then was to negotiate so that any merchandise that came through from local characters, locally developed characters, would remain in the country, so that we can carry on with the programs being developed. And I'm glad that it's still on air.
Wow.
And so, myself and two other women, head of SABC Education Television, and someone at USAID. It was just a wonderful coming together of thinking, the ability to make it happen, and to see it.
No, that's amazing. I know I grew up watching Big Bird, Elmo, Cookie Monster, all those characters, and now my daughter, who's just 2 years old, she's growing up looking at Elmo and all the Cookie Monster and all that. And this is, I'm talking like I'm not that old, but I'm talking like more than 35 years. But it's amazing how you've been such a great part in bringing that to a country that can change its trajectory. And I know in many things that you do, technology has always been the heart of a lot of things that you do currently. In your eyes, what kind of a role do you see AI playing in your role or in your industry in the future?
So in many things, I like to look at it historically because I believe history is an important way of learning from and working towards what the future is. And artificial intelligence is another inflection point, I believe, similar to when the World Wide Web was developed and the internet was developed, and the ability for the World Wide Web to make the internet more accessible to more people, in the way it was structured and to find information. What we have now is the next version with much more powerful, simply because the access to data is much more powerful than what it was when internet was first formed and the World Wide Web came into being. And this inflection point for me is quite key in terms of the changes that will happen in society. And a lot of it, again, if you look historically, a lot of it is around the application of AI to all industries, and who builds those, how they are used, how people train to be able to use them and build them. Then there's all the ethical issues that come in. And again, we can learn from what happens on the internet, right? And how long it took government to figure out how to find some way of creating some level of policy, etc., that guides the internet. And so we can learn, and we can do that perhaps much more quickly now. So there's a whole ethical side and the governance side of AI. And then it's about what's the value from an educational perspective. The fact that you can get AI to develop an essay for you much more quickly. So where's the learning coming from? Right? So what's the substance around researching, around analyzing? And so that's something we need to work on. I don't know what the answers are, but that's a key part, because if we're going to use AI as a learning tool, then we need to figure out a different way in which that learning tool can be structured. And what are we learning? And how is that going to shape the way our brain gets structured over time? Right? And so that's a piece, I think, that's still, the jury is kind of out on that one. I think the final piece is that AI is going to impact on how teaching and learning happens. So teaching in terms of what is the role of instructors and lecturers now, and what will their role be in maybe even a year's time or 2 years' time, right? How would we create tutorials now that are much more intuitive to what the learner is and whether they need lessons at a different level. And so following it in a more intuitive way rather than in a more linear way around what's the support that you need as a student. Right? So there's a whole host of things that will happen in the learning space and the teaching space, which I think for me is exciting, but it's going to take a lot of rethinking of what is the skill set that our lecturers need and our teachers need. Right? And then how do we make that real for the learner? So AI is going to impact that, and stating the obvious, but how is really going to be something that we have to grapple with, and quickly, given the nature of artificial intelligence, the change that it brings and the rapidity of that change. And given the vastness of the databases and the data sources that we have right now, which is where this AI gets its abilities from, and the way the backend algorithms are structured. And I think that's the kind of, for me, a bit of the scary side, is the rapidity of things that are happening.
Okay, that's amazing. So we are coming to the final part of our podcast or this conversation. And I always ask this question from all my guests who sits in that chair. And the question is, your experience, you had tremendous mentors, you had amazing stories, you had memories that will last lifetimes, or even I will share it with my friends now. But what is that one advice that's stuck across your head throughout your journey that helped you to become a successful immigrant and a successful leader in the technology space, shaping lives of the future leaders of Canada, Alberta? What's that piece of advice, Vis?
I grew up in a separated society based on race and based on your hair and your color of your skin and all of that. And for me, growing up and understanding the impact of that and recognizing a key value that is underpinning African communities in Southern Africa called Ubuntu. And roughly translated, it is I am because you are. And that explains the connectedness of people. Because if I am not who I am, and I do not interact with you because you are not who you are, we cannot work. So Ubuntu is about me and you, and what's that connected piece. And that has been a key driver for me, and it's something that I think will be important that we take into any society, into any ways in which AI helps shape our society and things like that. It's really about that ability to recognize people as people, no matter their education background, no matter the color of their skin, no matter anything. But it's about recognizing who they are. I grew up and an important poster that always and still is in our home right now is do unto others as you would have them do unto you. So just recognizing people for people and treat them as you would have them treat you. It's a simple thing because we are connected in the way that Ubuntu describes. And that's the thing that I want to bring, I hope I brought in all my work, and I would bring as an immigrant to Canada, as somebody newish to Alberta. And it's really a simple matter of just being basic humans.
Amazing. Wow. This is wonderful advice, I would say. I mean, Ubuntu is something that I personally believe as well in my own way. Like, you respect others and they will respect you. You do treat people the way that you like to be treated. And yeah, these are some beliefs that I believe personally as well. And it's amazing to hear all your stories, Vis, and it's wonderful to have you in the podcast. So I'd like to give you a big thank for accepting the invitation and sitting in front of me and sharing these amazing stories. And before we go, I'd like to ask you, how can my audience connect with you if they'd like to?
Well, I think the easiest and best way is to LinkedIn right now, and just search my name, and I'm sure you'll come across me, and let's connect. And in that way, either sharing stories or, more importantly, sharing our ability to connect and support each other.
Thank you very much. And that concludes our episode and the series with post-secondary educational leaders. What an amazing presence we had with Vis Naidoo, and his amazing humble presence and the soothing tone really brought some life to our show. And with that, I'd like to say bye for now. We'll see you on the next wave. Thank you very much. Thank you for joining us on the Infinite Waves podcast, where innovation never stops. Stay tuned for more insights and stories from visionary leaders, powered by Creative Innovations Lab. Until next time, let's keep pushing the boundaries of what's possible.